got we've got, this today we're going to talk a little bit, the first episode I kind of introduced, and I'm asking people, please, ask questions, share your experience. A lot of what this is about is supposed to be relatable. And I know just from being a therapist, from being a professor, from my own lived experience, especially more recently, that there's common bonds that we all experience, and I'm sure all of you can relate to that to some degree. Um, and I see my friend Erica is on and Andrew's on. Okay, great. And Dominic's on. Great. Okay, well, welcome you all. I appreciate you showing up. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, and also, kind of get some questions or maybe explore a little bit with those of you. And for those of you that, may watch the recording, feel free to email me or contact me if you have questions about the topic. Sometimes I know for myself at least, and maybe you can relate to this, that after I hear something and let it kind of marinate a little bit is when I have questions or something that relates to me. So, I was kind of thinking about what to talk about today, and again, my anxiety gets a little high sometimes when I'm live and there are people watching me, and I try to manage that the best I can. And some of you may relate to that with your own areas, that you do things. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about, this kind of the swing and what maybe your experiences are, something to happen. And so you put a lot of effort into it, and you try to make it happen, as opposed to when something just happens organically. Um, and I know for myself at least, and maybe some of you can relate to this, is like, professionally speaking, a lot of things, can flow like that when it happens organically. There's certain things that take place that make it happen. And in personal life, though, I think that might be a little different. And I'm just kind of curious if anybody has ever had that experience, but they really wanted something to happen and it didn't happen the way that they wanted it to. And yet maybe organically down the road, or, when they let it go, or they decided not to put so much effort into it, that it somehow worked better for them. I don't know if anybody can relate, if you want to speak up, or if you want to raise your hand, or if you want to just um, let me know, or if I'm just like solo in this period, in this experience too. I mean, that's all right. My hope is that I'm not. So I'm just, looking at, kind of some things that have happened, and I wonder too for people if it's different in terms of like when they do something that's related to employment or their work or something they're passionate about, or if it's related to something that they really truly desire. And desire can be looked at in a lot of different ways depending on the realm that you're in. Like, for example, being in the addictions field, desire is looked at differently as opposed to someone who may be in a romantic relationship, right? So we kind of also have to look at how we're defining different words. And I think that's also part of this pendulum shift sometimes, that we often don't know exactly what the intention is of the word. And so when we try to force something to happen, um, it may be in one sense of the word that we're thinking of it. And yet, when we let it go, and maybe then it blossoms in a completely different realm of our life. I don't know if anybody has had that experience or if that is like clear or makes sense, but I'd be curious to kind of open it up for a second and see if people want to share something.
The only thing I can say, Serena, is, and I cannot think of a particular instance, although I've had about a million, and you are not alone in this. I think everybody has experienced multiple times, these kind of things happening, and I know sometimes if you fight and you struggle and you try and try and try, and things just don't seem to be working out, yes, you just sometimes you feel defeated, and
Mm-hmm.
then other times you're frustrated. But then when you do, like what you were saying, when you do just say, oh, forget it, let me just move on, and then all of a sudden things somehow work out, and it may not be what you were wanting or hoping or wishing for, but somehow things always work out somehow. But yeah, but then in our lives other times things go very easily and smoothly. It's like
Mm-hmm.
pieces of a puzzle falling together, and that's always a good thing. So that's got to be right. You feel anyway. That's got to be right. This was a good thing. But the other side of that coin, where you struggle and fight all the time to make something work out, like what you were saying. I think sometimes you just have to know when to say enough, stop, or when, and move on. And it's
Mm-hmm.
still going to work out somehow,
Mm-hmm.
just not the way you were fighting for it to, maybe, but it will work out.
Right. Or maybe the way that you wanted it to happen. And I
Yeah.
think that's also part of that shift for a lot of people too, is that, we want things to work out the way we envision them,
Yes.
but that's not necessarily the way that it may work out in our life,
Mm-hmm.
like, and faith may have a lot to do with that too, depending on, the basis of a person's faith. I mean, I know I've worked, with a lot of people from different backgrounds and spiritual beliefs, and yet that seems to be a very common theme, is that, okay, so control, that's also the big thing too that comes into play, is trying to control it. I know that, when I've tried to control things to work in a certain way, I have to put so much effort into it, right? And then, yet when I relinquish that control and just let it go and say, okay, obviously what I'm doing is not working.
Right.
Um, so maybe someone else has a different suggestion, or maybe, I need to rely on my own faith at this point and just let a higher power, like
Right.
God, let,
Right.
my own spiritual beliefs come into play.
Right.
And I think, part of that too is also, is that pendulum. It's the difference between that ego and that spirit.
Yeah.
We all want what we want, sometimes in the moment. Um, and yet at the same time, it may not be the best for us, right? And so when we try to not control it so much, sometimes we get a bigger blessing, that we don't even realize.
That's right. And that's what I
And
was
so,
thinking. No, that's what I
okay.
was thinking too, that sometimes when we get what we get we can only see it in retrospect. We can
Yes.
only know looking back and say, oh, this is really the best thing, the best way it could have worked out, the best thing for me after all. So yeah, yeah, we have to
Yes.
accept that sometimes.
Yeah, and that's a great point though too, because I think also, I mean, at least in my experience, and and working within the field of mental health and substance use disorders for the last, well, a long time, I'll just put it like that. That, it is that not taking it personal, so to speak, of that
Right.
feeling of defeat, that maybe you did the best that you could at the time. And so it didn't work out the way you wanted to. So what is that? What's the next step? What's the next thing to do? Hi, Harvey. I'm glad you joined us.
I was just thinking as you guys were talking, Rolling Stones. Um, can't always get what you
Get
want,
what
but sometimes you get what you need.
you need. So,
How true. I sometimes wonder if they come up with these songs based on these kinds of experiences, because they resonate so much sometimes. I'm curious, Harvey, if you don't mind, have you had anything similar in terms of what I'm talking about, or have seen it
I,
in your
I
own
actually, I actually didn't hear the introduction, so I'm not sure what you're talking about.
experience? So we're talking about like when you try to force things to happen versus when they're organically happen on their own.
I think we all try to get as much control over the world and our lives as we can. And it's, the serenity prayer to recognize what you can change and accept what you can't change.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Because that relates a lot to when we allow things to happen organically. It's like there's only so much effort I could put into something, and sometimes I don't want to risk my life, so to speak, to get something that I want because
But
it may
most things, I think, are not risking our lives. Fortunately, for most of us, at least those of us who are privileged, sometimes people live in environments that is risking their lives all the time. But for those of us lucky enough to not face that every day, it's decision making between risk and gain of how much I think self-confidence comes from a reasonable assessment of competence, and you only become competent by taking risks and seeing if you can master it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That's very true. And sometimes that also relates to, looking at how much effort are you going to put, making an informed decision about the effort you're going to put, so to speak. Um, and then knowing like when to not push it further when it starts to become risky or it becomes out of your control, so to speak.
I think it's that whole frame of considering change, then planning for change, and then making the change and seeing if it's successful. I think it's about intentionality and not just
Absolutely.
your life by habit.
Yeah, intentionality plays a huge part in that too, and sometimes we're not always clear on our intentions, or our motives, so to speak, or truly what it is that we desire. I think that's a good point there. And I don't know if anyone else can relate to that or not. But I imagine though that, I mean, just based on some experiences that I've had and also the field is like, having to really clarify what the intention is for somebody. What is it that you're truly looking for and what's influencing that can sometimes be a part of that trying to force things to happen as opposed to it being more organically happening in flow, so to speak. I wonder if anybody else has anything that they want to comment on with that or can relate to with that. Otherwise, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Serenity Prayer because that's come up a few times today. So that seems fitting with forcing, controlling, and not controlling things.
Once you're done with that, Serena, I'll jump in for a minute.
No, go ahead and jump in.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm thinking sometimes it's understanding process over perfection.
Mm.
And I say that as an artist, there are times when you're embracing the process, you're trying to attain perfection in your play, your sculpture, your painting, whatever the case may be. But there's a time and a place to kind of walk away sometimes, give it a little breather, look at it from a different perspective. And I think that's maybe somewhere involved, maybe a loose thread in what you're talking about in terms of process, perfection, perspective. I think those are all important words, I think, to add to the discussion.
Absolutely.
Perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's also what the antithesis of healthy self-esteem too from some approaches, right? That perfectionism is kind of grounded in that insecurity and that how am I how am I looking towards others and all that too.
But I always preach and don't practice as well as evaluate yourself and others by effort, not achievement, because you can control the effort, you can't always control the achievement.
Well, and that's also, I mean, that's a great way of putting it, actually. I really like that. The whole idea of, how much effort did you put in with whether, I mean, because I know for me, like achievement has been one thing, right? And I know that I've achieved a lot, and it's like now at this part of my life, and I don't know if it's because I'm getting older and maybe it's different. I have no idea. But it really is about the effort that I'm putting into things and how it's more meaningful to me to do that. Like I don't need the gold star anymore at the end. It's more of okay, do I know what I'm putting into this at this point? And
Self-satisfaction.
yes, self-satisfaction. And so that's, I think, and that may even, I wonder, what your thoughts are about this. I'm wondering if that's even kind of like that in between, something that happens by force and something that happens organically is when you get to a certain point, there is some self-satisfaction, and then maybe that allows the process to continue in a more organic direction. I'm not sure what your thoughts are about that. No thoughts. Okay. That's a
Well,
lot to process. I'm sorry.
I've had a private
Not
practice.
sorry.
I've had a private practice for 47 years, so I've been doing a lot of preaching. And one of the things I say is, if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. That we can't stay in neutral too long. So it's how it is having an intentionality. I use a vignette when I start seeing people, and they're not sure why they want to get into counseling. From It's a vignette from Alice in Wonderland, where the Mad Hatter is running back and forth under a tree, and he sees the Cheshire Cat in the tree, and he asks the Cheshire Cat, "Quick, tell me how to get to where I want to go." And the Cheshire Cat says, "Where do you want to go?" The Mad Hatter thinks for a minute, and he says, "I don't know." And the Cheshire Cat says, "Then it doesn't matter how you get there." It's living a intentional life.
Mm-hmm. And you reminded me of something I saw on Facebook one time, a posting, and it said something to the effect of like, if something is not allowing you to grow, you need to move. So you move forward, you move up, or you move on. And I really liked that because I thought that really encompassed a lot of how sometimes we get stuck, right? And try to force
What's the
things
sign of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over
over and
again and
over
expecting a
again.
different result.
Yeah. And we've all taken part in that at some point. So absolutely. Pramila, I'm not sure how much more time we have. I don't want to like start a new like thought process and then have to
Yeah, we have about another 10 minutes.
about another 10 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, sure. It's
So
an
I'm
interesting
curious.
discussion going on.
Okay, great. I'm curious if there are any questions that people have or can relate to, some of these other pieces that have come up. How do you like find, the difference, when you're looking about your own kind of life, how do you see yourself forcing things or trying to control it or then needing it to let go or trying to let it go, or how do you let it go? Maybe that's a different way of putting it. What kinds of things, I know for myself, like, what Harvey mentioned, the serenity prayer has been, or a version of that has been helpful. Being intentional with what it is that I'm wanting and recognizing when I want something and how it's not usually about what I want. Sometimes it's more about what I need, as I already mentioned. Um, and I'm curious, like, what other people, if you're willing to share, or if you have some questions, you can always put it in the chat box. That's fine too. Um, but that's kind of the space that I wanted to keep this particular session in, is looking at, this, what happens when we try to force things and make something happen as opposed to allowing it to just flow on its own. The other piece that I've thought about with this is, being patient. I don't know about many of you. I know that sometimes I struggle with patience. And, because when I want something to happen, I want it to happen rather than waiting for it to happen. And so I'm curious, if that's been other people's experience, or maybe even if it has been, what have you found that has worked to help you be patient? Too? That might be something that we talk a little bit more in depth next time.
Yeah, a lot of things have been rolling over in my head, and it's like, oh gosh, what do I do when I'm impatient? How do I handle that? And I have to honestly say, I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
I'm trying to be fair, and in saying that, I don't know what I do. I wish I had an answer.
Okay.
Uh, it, hmm, I yeah, I don't know. It does make me think about, and I'm sure everybody's heard this, but I'm not a joke teller, but it's something like uh, somebody's praying for patience, and they're saying, "Dear God, please give me patience. I need patience. Please give me patience, and I want it now." I, I told you I'm not a joke teller.
No, that was
but, but I've always thought that was funny, and I thought it's also appropriate for most people. We are we're impatient being patient.
Mhm.
So, and
Very much so.
know, and I don't know.
Well, and I've noticed for myself at least that, and I don't know if other people have noticed this, and I don't know if it's an, and I keep referring back to the age thing, but as I've gotten older, I just had a birthday, so of course things are being more reflective around that too, is trying not to force things to happen and yet still being impatient with them happening, like still wanting them to happen now.
Mhm.
And recognizing, okay, because now it just seems like I don't have as enough time as I did when I was in my 20s, maybe, but
Yeah.
it's like, all right, I'll be patient. The universe, or the world, my higher power, however you would like to term that, obviously has a different plan than I do. Um, and there's only so much that I could do in that factor. And as long as, like what we were talking about earlier, as long as I can put that effort in and know that I'm doing the right thing, then maybe there's a chance it works out for the best. And I think Harvey mentioned too, but as long as I know that I'm putting the effort in, sometimes that has more meaning than not.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it kind of like ties it all together too. I don't know if anybody wanted to make a comment, because I was just going to kind of throw out some questions to think about if you're interested in joining for the next session, and also looking at hopefully questions that you may have that you would like to have brought up to explore. But I'll give it like a few seconds if anybody wants to say what's on their mind.
I think, Dr. Serena, you put up a lot of food for thought. And I think we just need to digest it. And as Cheryl said, it's all rolling in our minds, but, we just need the right words and the right thoughts to channel it in a way that, our listeners, our viewers, and you can relate to, is my thought.
No, and I appreciate that, because sometimes it makes more sense in my mind. And since I've already thought about this stuff, it's like, okay, I need to break this down a little bit, or I need to be careful how much I pour out, because I'm not sure if other people are thinking these same kind of things too. So I don't want to overwhelm people. And at the same time, again, here's the shift. It's about what I want. No, let's let it happen organically. Here's a prime example of this happening in real time. So what we can do then is to leave it there. I know there was a lot of different topics that came up. And kind of to summarize, looking at some of these points to think about, like when you put effort in, what's intentionality? How do you manage patience in your own life in the real world? Because it's such a virtue that we all strive for. And at the same time, when we live in the real world, how do you exactly go about demonstrating that and showing it? And then we talked a little bit about, allowing things to happen organically and when things are not in your control. And so those are things that I'll kind of put out there and leave you with for this episode to think about. And I'll come back to them next time we meet, or next time that, next session that, or I'm sorry, oh my goodness, I'm so used to saying session like a therapist, the next podcast that we have. and kind of see if anybody has any insight or thoughts about those particular concepts. So Pramila-ji, is that a good way to kind of wrap it up for today?
Absolutely, yes. And I think we'll add these notes on to our social pages also to say, this is what the discussion was. The recording is there. The session is up. Sorry, the Facebook session is live. And I think we're all excited. I am excited for the next session already.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. And then we'll put out when the next session or the next series will be, hopefully in 2 weeks, but that link will be made available again on Facebook, and I will send it out to people as well. So Pramila-ji, thank you so much for hosting me again.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure, and nice to have all the guests today. We look forward to seeing you again, and everyone watching here on the social pages. Thank you, Dr. Serena, for another insightful and very interesting topic that we often think of, but do not talk it loud. So have a great evening, everyone, and thanks all for joining in.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you.